Hey, this is Arvind. I'm a neuroscientist and speech-language pathologist. Watch this next video. It is going to absolutely change the way you look at speech-sound disorders. It's a 6-minute video, but it's going to be worth your time. Comment paper, and I'll send you the paper link as well.
Have you ever listened to a child who's really struggling to say a word and just wondered, what's actually going on in there? Well, it turns out the answer might be something we literally can't even hear. Today, we're going to dive into some pretty amazing research that's challenging just about everything we thought we knew about diagnosing speech disorders in kids.
So picture this. A kid is having trouble making certain sounds. A speech pathologist listens in, jots down the errors, and makes a diagnosis. Seems simple enough, right? But what if the most critical piece of the puzzle isn't something we can hear at all? And that question, what if we can't hear the real problem? Well, that's what brings us to our first big idea. For decades, the entire field has been built on the trained ear of a clinician. But as we're about to find out, our ears might not be the gold standard we've always assumed they were. You see, the standard way of doing things is for a clinician to listen really carefully to a child's speech and then write down what they hear using the International Phonetic Alphabet, the IPA. That transcription becomes the blueprint for figuring out what kind of disorder the child has. But here is where it gets tricky. And this quote from way back in 1996 absolutely nails it. What a clinician writes down isn't a perfect objective record of what the child's mouth and tongue are doing. Nope. It's the clinician's interpretation of that sound. And we all know interpretations can be subjective. So this begs a really important question. What if our ears, even highly trained ones, are biased? What if our brains are wired to hear what we expect to hear, smoothing over the little details that might tell a completely different story? This idea of bias leads us straight to what researchers call the ground truthing problem. And that's basically the gap, which can be surprisingly wide, between what we perceive and what's actually happening in reality. So, what is ground truthing? It's just a way of saying we need to get to the objective truth by using direct measurement, with instruments, instead of just relying on our assumptions. For speech, that means looking at what a child's tongue is physically doing, not just listening to the sound that comes out. And this is where my mind was kind of blown. Scientists have found this phenomenon they call covert contrast. It's an amazing idea. A child is actually making tiny, consistent, physical differences between two sounds. Differences you can measure with instruments, but our human ears just can't pick them up. Let's make this super concrete. Here's a classic example. A child seems to say top when they actually mean cop. To you and me, it sounds like they're just swapping the C for a T. We hear top both times. But what if instruments show that when they try to say cop, their tongue makes a slightly different movement in the back of their mouth? It means the child knows there's a difference. Their brain is sending the right signal, but their motor skills aren't fine-tuned enough yet to make it obvious to a listener. And get this is not some rare, quirky thing. One study found that a whopping 71% of kids diagnosed with phonological disorders, which are seen as language-based, actually had these underlying physical motor patterns that a simple listening test would completely miss. I mean, just let that sink in. We could be treating a physical motor control issue as if it's a language problem. So if a lot of these aren't the disorders we thought they were, then what are they? This brings us to a really powerful analogy that helps completely reframe how we think about a child's speech development. Just look at this. It's the life cycle of a butterfly. Now, if you only took snapshots, a picture of an egg, then one of a caterpillar, then a chrysalis, you might think you're looking at 3 totally different creatures. You might even call the caterpillar a disordered butterfly because it can't fly. But when you see the whole journey over time, you realize they're all just necessary stages along a single continuous path of development. And that is exactly the problem with so many of our diagnostic models. They're based on these cross-sectional studies, a snapshot of a child at one single moment in time. When we do that, we run the risk of taking a temporary phase, like being a caterpillar, and mislabeling it as a fixed, permanent disorder. So, if we stop taking these snapshots and start looking at the whole movie, what does that mean for diagnosis? Well, it means we need a totally new approach. We need to move away from these rigid boxes and labels and toward a more flexible, continuous view of development. Let's just put these two ideas side by side. The old categorical way tries to fit a child into a neat little box, like phonological disorder. It assumes these problems are all separate things. But the new dimensional approach, it throws out the boxes. Instead, it builds a unique profile of a child's skills across a whole range of abilities.
seeing it all as one big continuum. And this is what that looks like. It's so much more informative. Instead of one simple and maybe misleading label, you get this rich, detailed map of a child's abilities. This chart shows a child's profile across all these different dimensions: motor skills, language, memory, you name it. It lets us see not just where they're struggling, but also where they're strong, and crucially, how all of these different pieces fit together.
Okay, this is all fascinating stuff, but let's get down to brass tacks. Why does this actually matter for kids in the real world? What's the payoff for shifting from labels to profiles?
Well, it matters a whole lot because the right diagnosis leads to the right help. When we understand a child's unique profile, we can create therapy that's actually personalized for them instead of just using a one-size-fits-all approach based on a label. It's about targeting the real underlying issues. It's basically precision medicine for speech therapy. And that, of course, leads to much, much better outcomes for children.
So the big idea to walk away with is this: by changing our perspective, we completely change the question we're asking. The goal isn't to find the right label to stick on a child anymore. Instead, the real question is, what does this child's unique developmental journey look like, and what support do they need right now to take the next step?